How much of this is an opening gambit? What would he negotiate? The thing with Donald Trump is you never know. But the Chinese economy is sputtering at the moment, and they feel more confident, by the way, at the same time in themselves. They wouldn't take this lying down, so it would have a big impact on them. It'd also have a very big impact on the US economy, putting up prices, and it would have impact in the UK and Europe because the Chinese would have to export their stuff somewhere else and probably come to us.
Now, politics, but across the pond. What happens to the difficult relationship between the US and China after next week's presidential election, especially if Donald Trump is the one returning to the White House? His first presidency saw a series of tariffs imposed on China as part of his America First economic policy, leading to a trade war between the nations. Let's ask Sir Robin Niblett, author of The New Cold War, how the contest between the US and China will shape our century. He's a leading expert on international relations and the former director of Chatham House. Robin, welcome to the programme.
Morning, Jane. Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So, Robin, you write that we're already in a new Cold War and that the contest between America and China is global, unbridgeable and all-encompassing. So, what happens to that if Donald Trump returns to the White House?
Well, very possibly it intensifies along one particular axis, which I think you mentioned earlier, which is the trade axis. As you may know, Donald Trump is somebody who believes that if America has a trade deficit, other countries are abusing it. And the way to fix that is to impose very high tariffs. Last time he went through a spate of trade wars with China, which ended up with him imposing tariffs of roughly 25%, 20% on a whole range of products, including some very high ones on steel and aluminium. This time he said he's going to impose tariffs of 60%, 60%
Wow.
on all imports from China. Now, the Chinese have been able to absorb the 25% tariff. There's been a decline in total Chinese exports to the United States in the last year or two. But overall, they've managed to weather it. But I tell you, weathering 60%, that's not going to happen. And now, how much of this is an opening gambit? What would he negotiate? The thing with Donald Trump is you never know. But the Chinese economy is sputtering at the moment, and they feel more confident, by the way, at the same time in themselves. They wouldn't take this lying down, so it would have a big impact on them. It'd also have a very big impact on the US economy, putting up prices, and it would have impact in the UK and Europe because the Chinese would have to export their stuff somewhere else and probably come to us.
Yes. So obviously the US is such a China and the US do have this interesting sort of, I guess, a symbiotic relationship while they have this kind of trade argument. And so how does that happen for both of them if 60% tariffs are imposed? What do they do with that trade?
Well, as I said, I think part of the problem for China is that America remains its single largest single country export. It exports more to the EU collectively than it does to the US. It exports more to ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, its neighbors, than it does to the US. But the US is the single country, biggest single country export market. So it would definitely have a big impact on them. And I think for global trade as a whole, the dangers are that it would set a precedent that others would have to fight back on. The Chinese might impose some big tariffs on the Americans. The Americans have to sell, let's say, aircraft, Boeing aircraft. If you don't sell to China, it's a big problem. You've got Russian and Chinese, combination between those two countries at the moment, which means that energy prices might be affected. All sorts of spillovers could take place.
Well, would that anyone could get hold of a Boeing right now, Robin? I mean, they're not selling many, are they? But it doesn't totally go away, does it, if Kamala Harris wins on Tuesday?
Absolutely. Look, Kamala Harris, one would have to assume, would continue roughly what the Biden administration has been doing, which is a much more subtle approach. I call it sort of reversing into the new Cold War. They realized, I think Americans in general realized, that they'd got too close to China during the heyday of the 2000s, when everyone thought that China would be sort of a member of the rules-based trading order. They didn't expect the economy to become as strong as it has. They didn't expect it to move up the value chain and start competing with us in high-end products, semiconductors, electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, wind farms, etc. So the Chinese have really moved up the value chain, become a much more ferocious competitor than they have been in the past. And this poses a big challenge going forward, whoever wins. Now, if Harris wins, the continuation would be to try to make sure that the limits on the trade between the two countries is targeted. They've done this thing called building a small yard garden in English with a high fence. In other words, they just wanted to restrict certain types of technology from getting to China and let the rest of the trading relationship be healthy. That's easier said than done because, where are the limits of what is dangerous for America to export? It could be semiconductors, it could be AI, it could be quantum computing. But these days, everything has technology in it. An electric vehicle is communicating back to the manufacturer. And so even a Harris administration would probably find itself increasing limits on trade with China over time, just in a much less aggressive and demonstrative way.
Robin, can the international community kind of try to manage this Trump v. China situation from the outside? And if so, who and how?
Well, a sort of rather blunt answer to that, I'm afraid, is who is the international community? What is the international community if you exclude the world's two largest, most powerful countries? And in any case, the United States had been, for the last 30, 40 years at least, the leader of what we interpreted as the international community. If you have an America first under Trump, then that is an explicit repudiation of America as a member of or a leader of the international community. And even under Harris or Biden, you've seen America taking a much more self-interested approach. It does not lead on global trade negotiations anymore. Even Biden has not allowed the WTO, the World Trade Organization, that manifestation of global trade rules. He's not allowed it to adjudicate any disputes since he's been president. So the Americans have withdrawn from international economic leadership. And if you put Russia and China alongside with Iran and other countries allied with them in a very explicit way, but you also have this thing called the BRICS, this club that's made up of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's a sort of new community of countries that resent American economic leadership and are trying to build up an alternative sort of community that will have different sets of economic rules. Where's the international community in that? The EU is meant to be America's ally on an international community, but the EU, if Trump wins, will probably be divided from America. So I'm afraid I don't see a world where there is an international community. The most I'm hoping for, to be frank, is that it's possible for the sort of liberal democracies like Britain, like the EU, like America, if it wants to carry on playing a constructive leadership role in the world, that those countries will coordinate their economic policies, their security policies, their technology policies in a way that will create a new sort of community for other countries to join in later on. But all of that is up in the air till we know who wins on November the 5th, to be frank.
Well, we might not know on November the 5th, might we, Robin?
Fair
It
point,
might
fair
be
point.
quite a while before we do. Thank you, Robin. Fascinating. You've slightly anxiety-inducing stuff.
Sorry to spoil the morning.
No, it's a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for your insights. We really appreciate it. The new Cold War by Robin Niblett is available at timesbookshop.co.uk, where Times Plus members can enjoy a 20% discount on that and thousands of other titles.